In this video, we'll look at how to use SPSS to enter a covariate into an Ancova model. Covariates can help improve the accuracy of an estimate of an experimental effect. We'll build on our example of an experiment of a sight-singing method provided in the chapter Design and Analysis of Experimental Research 1. The data for this example can be found in the file Miksza and Elpus Sight-Singing Intervention-Ancova. In this example, students are randomly assigned to one of three conditions: a control that receives typical sight-singing instruction, an experimental group that experiences a new method but with a burdensome amount of instruction and practice, and another experimental group that experiences the same new method but with less burdensome amounts of instruction and practice. The outcome variable for this hypothetical study is sight-singing test scores. However, let's also imagine that we're suspicious that the participants in this study vary substantially in audiation ability, and therefore we're concerned that this variance could obscure the results of this experiment. Therefore, we'd want to adjust for this potential effect in some way. After all, it would be important to know if the experimental conditions would impact sight-singing ability independent of whether the students have good audiation abilities or not. Well, one method for testing whether this is the case is by including a measure of audiation ability as a covariate in the Ancova analysis. Consequently, the statistical test that would be used is called an analysis of covariance, or an Ancova. So to do this, we'll go to the Analyze menu, and we'll use the General Linear Model routine and the univariate option. We'll put test score in as our outcome, our dependent variable, group in as our fixed factor, and audiation in as our covariate. So we're asking SPSS to see if the variation in test score can be explained by the various groupings of the experimental or control conditions, and while also adjusting or controlling, to put it somewhat roughly, for audiation ability. So we could also ask for, as we usually do, a mean plot for the various groups, and some summary statistics for the group, as well as an effect size indicator. One of the nice things about the general linear model routine in SPSS is that it does have this option of estimates of effect size, whereas in the one-way Ancova windows of SPSS, you don't have any options to get an estimate of effect size. So we can click Continue and OK, and let's see what happens. So first we get a summary of our three groups and how they're coded: the control group, the lightly burdened new instructional group, and the heavy burdened new instruction group with 50 people in each. And then we have our main Ancova results, where in the general linear model routine we see some extra rows that we wouldn't see in the one-way Ancova model. And for all intents and purposes, we don't need to really spend any time talking about these. Just know that you wouldn't be writing about these or interpreting them, and they don't have much bearing on your or any bearing really on your hypotheses in this case. So the first line that is output that is of consequence is the covariate. In other words, the effect of audiation on sight-singing test scores. And we see that that effect is statistically significant, being much lower, with this value being much lower than our traditional threshold of 0.05. In fact, we can say that about 23.4% of the variance in sight-singing test scores could be explained by audiation ability. That's the basic way you can interpret a partial eta squared value, is according to percentage of variance shared. You can also interpret this as a moderate to large effect, given various rules of thumb. And then we would look at our source for group, and we see that the grouping factor is also a statistically significant factor, with an eta squared value of 0.275, which is also moderate to large there, and we're explaining about 27.5% of the variation in test scores with the grouping factor. So it looks like our covariate was significant and did a good job in terms of clarifying our experimental result. So, the next thing SPSS gives us are the means that we asked for, but notice the superscript here, and recognize that means that are printed, estimated marginal means that SPSS gives us here, are actually means that have been arithmetically adjusted in some way to compensate for the differences in audiation ability. So these aren't the literal arithmetic means that we would get by going to the data editor and adding up and divided by 50 for each group here. They're means that are adjusted in some computational way to take into account the differences between the people in audiation ability. And then lastly, we have our plot that shows a pretty nice clear distinction between the experimental groups and the control group here. So we can do something else that's interesting here. I took the liberty before recording this video of running a simple general linear model with group as a factor and without covariate included in the model, without the audiation covariate included in the model. So let's take note of three different things here that are different when we have the covariate or not. First of all, how much of the variation is explained by the experimental treatment. When we do have the covariate in the model, 27.5% of variation is explained by the treatment grouping. And let's take a look when we don't. When we don't have the covariate in the model, you see audiation is no longer here, only 21.9% of the variation is explained by the experimental treatment. So we do get a stronger effect when we have the covariate in the model. And so that's one hint that our covariate is doing a good job at amplifying the precision of our statistical test here. Another hint is the degree of error that's left over in our model. Here we have sums of squares that add up to about 11,200 something as our error term. And then let's look at the model, the error term we get in the model without a covariate, more like 14,600 something. So we're missing more stuff in this model. There's more variation left over that is soaked up or explained by the audiation covariate here, which helps to explain the difference in the sums of squares values there. And then lastly, let's take a look at how different these means are from their arithmetic averages. In other words, how much of an effect of the audiation ability adjusting the means actually had. And so we have 40, 48, 53. If we look up here, if we have, notice there's no more superscripts, they're not adjusted by the covariate. We have 40, 49, and 53. So those are fairly similar. We're not talking about large gross adjustments of numerical values there. But we do see an effect in our model here of a reduction in error and an increase in the variation explained by our grouping factor, which is telling us that the addition of our covariate of audiation has increased the precision and power of our test here. Precision, I should say, more specifically. So that is the basics of Ancova in SPSS. Thank you very much.